Dr. Rebecca Chen stood in the climate-controlled vault of the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, carefully looking over a donation that had arrived from an estate sale in Charleston, South Carolina. The photograph before her was remarkably well preserved. An 1873 family portrait showing the prestigious Hartwell family in their drawing room. At 53, Rebecca had spent 3 decades studying post-Civil War photography, specializing in images that documented the complex transition from slavery to freedom. This particular photograph had been donated anonymously with a note stating only found in attic thought it might be historically significant. The Hartwells were arranged with studied formality. Richard Hartwell, a cotton mill owner, stood behind his seated wife, Catherine. Their 4 children were positioned around them in descending order of age, all dressed in the finest fabrics Charleston could offer. The photographer had captured every detail: the velvet curtains, the Persian rug, the oil paintings on the walls, but it was the figure at the far right that caught Rebecca's attention. A young black boy, perhaps 11 or 12 years old, stood slightly apart from the family. He wore a dark suit that, while clean and properly fitted, was clearly of lesser quality than the Hartwells' clothing. His face held a carefully composed expression, not quite smiling, but not overtly sad either. What struck Rebecca most were his hands. The boy wore white cotton gloves, unusual for a child in a formal portrait. One glove appeared pristine, but the other, his right hand, showed dark discoloration across the palm and fingers. Rebecca had seen thousands of historical photographs, and something about those stains made her pause. She called her colleague, Dr. Michael Torres, the museum's chief conservator and forensic photography specialist. "Michael, I need you to look at something." When he arrived, Rebecca pointed to the boy's gloved hand. "What do you make of those stains?" Michael leaned in with his magnifying loupe, studying the image carefully. His expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "Now we need to digitize this immediately." The next morning, Rebecca and Michael gathered in the museum's digital imaging laboratory. The photograph had been scanned at the highest resolution their equipment allowed, and now the image filled a large monitor where every minute detail could be examined. Michael began with the family, documenting the clothing styles, furniture, and other contextual elements that would help authenticate and date the photograph. Then he moved to the boy. As he increased the magnification on the right glove, both researchers fell silent. The dark stains were not uniform. They formed distinct patterns concentrated at the fingertips and palm, with smaller spots scattered across the back of the hand. Under high magnification, the texture of the stains became visible. They had soaked into the cotton fibers, creating darker areas where the fabric had absorbed liquid. "I want to run a spectral analysis," Michael said quietly. "These stains have a specific quality that concerns me." Using specialized software, he analyzed the light absorption and reflection patterns of the stained areas. The computer compared them against a database of known substances commonly found in historical photographs: ink, tea, coffee, photographic chemicals, rust, soil. The results appeared on screen, and Michael's jaw tightened. "Rebecca, these absorption patterns are consistent with hemoglobin degradation. These aren't chemical stains or dirt." Rebecca felt her stomach drop. "You're saying that's blood?" "I'm saying we need to confirm it, but yes, the spectral signature matches aged blood on fabric. And given the pattern concentrated on areas that would contact surfaces during manual labor, I think this child was bleeding when this photograph was taken." They sat in silence, staring at the image. The boy's composed expression took on new meaning. He had stood there, his hand injured and bleeding, forced to pose with the family while in pain. Rebecca pulled up the donation records. The photograph is dated 1873. That's 8 years after the 13th Amendment. Slavery was abolished. Michael turned to her, his expression grim. "But we both know that didn't mean freedom." Rebecca spent the following week immersed in Charleston archives, reconstructing the Hartwell family history. What she found painted a picture of a family that had adapted skillfully to the post-war economy, maintaining their wealth and status through carefully legal means. Richard Hartwell had owned a modest cotton plantation before the war. With 43 enslaved people documented in the 1860 census, when the Confederacy fell, He pivoted quickly. Rather than attempting to maintain agricultural operations without enslaved labor, he invested in Charleston's emerging textile industry, opening a cotton processing mill in 1867. The mill employed over 60 workers by 1870, most of them black men, women, and children. The wages were minimal, barely enough for survival, and the working conditions were documented in several complaints filed with the Freedmen's Bureau. Workers reported 12-hour shifts, dangerous machinery, and frequent injuries. But what caught Rebecca's attention were the apprenticeship contracts she found in the Charleston County records. Between 1866 and 1874, Richard Hartwell had bound 17 black children to his household and a mill through the legal apprenticeship system. The contracts were virtually identical. Children between ages 8 and 14 were bound to Hartwell until age 21 in exchange for room, board, moral instruction, and training in useful trades. One contract dated April 1871 listed a boy named Samuel, described as Negro child, approximately 9 years of age, orphaned, bound to Richard Hartwell for a term of 12 years for instruction in domestic service and mill work. No last name, no parents mentioned, though Rebecca suspected orphaned was often a convenient legal fiction. Just Samuel bound to work for 12 years without wages, without the ability to leave, without legal recourse if mistreated. Rebecca found a mill inspection report from 1872 that mentioned apprentice children working in the sorting and carting rooms. The report noted that several children had sustained hand injuries from the machinery and recommended improved safety procedures, though there was no evidence such procedures were ever implemented. She pulled up the photograph again, studying the boy's face with new understanding. Samuel would have been approximately 11 years old in 1873. To understand what had happened to the boy's hands, Rebecca needed to understand the work he had been forced to do. She contacted Dr. Patricia Okafor, a labor historian at the College of Charleston, who specialized in Reconstruction-era industrial working conditions. Dr. Okafor arrived at the museum with a folder full of documentation. Cotton mills in the 1870s were death traps, she said bluntly, spreading photographs and diagrams across the conference table, especially for children. She explained that children were preferred for certain jobs because their small hands could reach into tight spaces in the machinery. They worked in the carding room, where raw cotton was combed and straightened by machines with thousands of sharp wire teeth. They worked in the spinning room, where they had to tie broken threads while the machines ran at full speed. And they worked in the sorting room, where they picked through raw cotton for hours, removing debris, seeds, and foreign material. The work destroyed their hands, Patricia said, showing Rebecca photographs from other mills of the era. While cotton fibers are abrasive, after hours of handling raw cotton, the skin on their fingertips and palms would become raw, cracked, and bleeding. Add in cuts from the machinery, punctures from cotton stems, and infections from the dirty conditions, and you had children whose hands were constantly injured. She pulled out a testimony from a Freedmen's Bureau investigation in 1873, the same year as the photograph. A mill worker in Charleston had reported, "The children's hands bleed every day. They wrap them in whatever cloth they can find and keep working because if they stop, they don't eat." Rebecca felt sick. They made him wear gloves for the photograph to hide the injuries. Patricia nodded. White gloves would seem like a genteel touch, something to make the child look well cared for and properly dressed, but they were really covering up evidence of abuse. Rebecca thought about Catherine Hartwell insisting on the photograph, wanting to document their prosperous, respectable family. She wondered if the woman had even noticed the blood seeping through the cotton, or if she simply hadn't cared. Finding Samuel's full story required detective work across multiple archives. Rebecca started with the Freedmen's Bureau records, searching for any mention of a boy named Samuel, apprentice to the Hartwells. She found 3 relevant documents that began to piece together his history. The first was a letter dated March 1871, written in careful, uncertain handwriting. "Dear Sir, they say my boy Samuel is apprenticed to Mr. Hartwell Mill, and I cannot get him back. I am his mother and I can provide for him. Please help me, sir. Respectfully, Ruth." No last name, no address, just Ruth. Rebecca's hands trembled as she photographed the document. The second document was the response from a bureau agent. examined the apprenticeship contract for the Negro boy Samuel. The binding was conducted according to South Carolina law. The child was deemed to be in need of supervision and training. Mother's petition is denied. The third was a note in the margin of a bureau record book. Ruth Washerwoman appeared at office multiple times requesting return of son Samuel, age 9. Apprentice to R. Hartwell explained legal process. Woman became hysterical, removed from office. Rebecca sat back, anger and sorrow overwhelming her. Ruth had tried. She had fought for her son through the only legal channels available to her, and the system had dismissed her, labeled her hysterical, and left her child in bondage. Working with a genealogist specializing in African American family history, Rebecca found Ruth's trail through church records and city directories. She had been enslaved on a rice plantation outside Charleston until 1865. When freedom came, she had made her way to the city with her 2 children, Samuel and a younger daughter named Grace. Ruth had found work as a washwoman, exhausting labor that paid barely enough to rent a single room. In 1871, a white neighbor reported to authorities that Ruth's children were inadequately supervised while she worked. The county court took Samuel that same month, binding him to Hartwell. Grace was taken 6 months later and apprenticed to a different family. Ruth had continued working, continued trying to get her children back, and continued being denied. The last record of her was in an 1875 city directory, still listed as a washerwoman. At the same address, Rebecca found an unexpected source of information, the business ledger of William Archer, the photographer who had taken the Hartwell family portrait. Archer had been one of Charleston's premier photographers, and his detailed records had been preserved by the Charleston Historical Society. The entry for the Hartwell Commission was dated November 14, 1873. Hartwell family portrait. Fee $15. Subjects: 6 family members, 1 house servant, 3 plates exposed. Mrs. Hartwell required multiple attempts due to dissatisfaction with children's positioning. There was a note in the margin, written in a different ink, apparently added later. Difficulty with the Negro boy would not smile. Hands wrapped in bandages replaced with gloves per Mrs. H's instruction. Boy appeared unwell but completed sitting. Rebecca felt a chill. The photographer had noticed Samuel's condition. He had documented it in his private records. Yet he had proceeded with the photograph, helping to create an image that concealed the truth. She found something else in Archer's papers, a letter to a colleague dated a week after the Hartwell session. In it, Archer wrote, "I am increasingly troubled by commissions that require me to photograph apprentice children with the families who bind them. The children uniformly appear poorly, often bearing signs of hard labor. Yet the families insist on portraying scenes of domestic harmony and benevolence. I am complicit in creating false documents, and I confess it weighs on my conscience." Yet Archer had continued taking such photographs for years. His ledgers showed dozens of similar commissions, wealthy families posing with apprentice children. Each photograph a carefully constructed lie. Rebecca understood the complexity. Archer had been dependent on wealthy clients for his livelihood. Speaking out would have meant financial ruin. But his silence had helped these families hide their exploitation behind images of genteel respectability. The photograph wasn't just evidence of what had happened to Samuel. It was evidence of an entire society that had witnessed child exploitation and chosen to look away, or worse, to help conceal it. As Rebecca continued her research, she discovered that Samuel's case was not isolated, but part of a vast system that had entrapped thousands of black children across the South. Working with other historians, she began to map the full scope of the apprenticeship system in post-war South Carolina. Between 1865 and 1875, over 12,000 black children in South Carolina alone had been bound to white families and businesses through apprenticeship contracts. The pretense was always the same. The children needed moral instruction and training in useful trades. The reality was forced labor. Rebecca found legislative records showing how the system had been designed. In 1865, even before South Carolina was readmitted to the Union, the state had passed its Black Code, a series of laws specifically targeting freed black people. The apprenticeship law gave county courts sweeping authority to bind black children to white guardians if their parents were deemed unable to support them, or if the children were found wandering or idle. The definitions were deliberately vague and selectively enforced. A black child walking home from school could be picked up as wandering. A black parent working long hours could be deemed neglectful for leaving children unsupervised. The system was designed to separate black families and provide white employers with a captive labor force. Rebecca found testimony from a federal investigation in 1874. A Freedmen's Bureau agent had reported, "The apprenticeship system, as practiced in South Carolina, is slavery by another name. Children are torn from their parents, forced to work without wages, beaten if they resist, and returned by force if they attempt to flee. The only difference from the old system is that now there's a piece of paper that calls it legal." That investigation had led to some reforms, but enforcement was weak and inconsistent. Many children remained bound for years after the system was officially challenged. Rebecca also found records of resistance. Black parents who hid their children when county officials came, black communities that organized to challenge apprenticeships in court, children who ran away repeatedly despite the threat of punishment, and black newspapers that documented and protested the system, though their voices were largely ignored by white authorities. The most difficult part of Rebecca's research was discovering what had happened to Samuel after the photograph was taken. She worked with genealogist Marcus Williams, who specialized in tracing post-emancipation African American families through fragmentary records. They found Samuel's trail through a combination of sources. A hospital record from 1874 listed Samuel, Negro boy, age approx 12, admitted with infection of right hand, employed at Hartwell Mill. The treatment notes described severe lacerations and embedded cotton fibers requiring surgical removal. The infection had been serious enough to hospitalize Samuel for 2 weeks. Rebecca found the bill in Hartwell's business papers, $8 for medical care, noted as an unexpected expense for apprenticed boy. After his release, Samuel had returned to the mill. But in 1876, when he was approximately 14 years old, something changed. The Freedmen's Bureau records contained a report filed by a Union Army officer still stationed in Charleston. He had encountered Samuel on the street with infected wounds on both hands and had taken him to the Bureau office. The officer's report was scathing. "This boy has been worked nearly to death. His hands are so damaged that he can barely use them. He reports being beaten for working too slowly due to his injuries. This is not apprenticeship. This is torture." The Bureau agent who received the report had finally acted, declaring Samuel's apprenticeship void due to evidence of extreme mistreatment. Samuel was released from the Hartwell household in August 1876, 5 years after being taken from his mother, but Ruth was gone. Marcus found a death record. Ruth, Negro woman, washerwoman, died June 1876, consumption. She had died just 2 months before Samuel was freed, never knowing her son would be returned. Samuel had been 15 years old, alone, with permanently damaged hands that would affect his ability to work for the rest of his life. Rebecca and Marcus traced him through city directories and church records, finding that he had survived working as a porter and later as a custodian. He had married in 1884 and had 3 children. The photograph Rebecca had been studying was taken just a year before Samuel's hospitalization, capturing him at a moment when his hands were already damaged, but his suffering would intensify before anyone intervened. Rebecca stood in the museum's exhibition design room, surrounded by photographs, documents, and artifacts that told Samuel's story and the stories of thousands of children like him. The exhibition, titled Hidden Wounds, Child Labor After Emancipation, was scheduled to open in 3 months. The centerpiece was the Hartwell family portrait, now displayed on a large screen where visitors could zoom in on details themselves. Beside it hung a forensic analysis showing how modern imaging technology had identified the bloodstains on Samuel's glove. Adjacent panels displayed the apprenticeship contract that had bound Samuel, Ruth's letters begging for his return, and the hospital records documenting his injuries. But Rebecca had insisted on something more. Working with Marcus and descendants of other apprentice children, she had created a memorial wall listing every name they could find of children bound through South Carolina's apprenticeship system. Over 8,000 names filled the wall, each one representing a childhood stolen, a family separated. Many names were incomplete, just first names or initials, as the county records often didn't bother documenting full identities for black children. But each name was there, bearing witness. Rebecca had also tracked down Samuel's descendants. His great-great-grandson, a teacher named David Collins from Atlanta, had traveled to Washington to see the exhibition before it opened. He stood before the photograph for a long time, studying his ancestor's face. "I knew some of the family history," David said quietly. "My grandmother told me that Samuel had been taken from his mother as a child and forced to work in terrible conditions. She said his hands were scarred his whole life, but I never knew there was a photograph." Rebecca showed him the forensic analysis, explaining how the bloodstains had been identified. David's jaw tightened. They made him pose like that, bleeding in pain, and they smiled for the camera like everything was perfect. "The photograph was meant to hide the truth," Rebecca said, "but now it's going to reveal it. Samuel's story is going to be told, and people are going to understand what was done to him and thousands of other children." The exhibition opened on a humid morning in June 2024. Rebecca had expected a modest crowd, but over 500 people attended the opening, many of them descendants of apprenticed children who had found their ancestors' names on the memorial wall. The Hartwell family portrait dominated the first room, displayed at eye level, where visitors couldn't avoid confronting it. An interactive screen allowed people to zoom in on Samuel's glove themselves, watching as the magnification increased, and the dark stains became unmistakable. Many visitors stood there for several minutes, silently processing what they were seeing. Audio stations throughout the exhibition played. Ruth's letters read aloud, her desperate voice recreated by an actress. "They say, 'My boy Samuel is apprenticed to Mr. Hartwell Mill, and I cannot get him back. I am his mother, and I can provide for him.'" Visitors wept openly as they listened. The exhibition explained the legal framework that had enabled the apprenticeship system, displaying the actual text of South Carolina's Black Code alongside testimonies from parents and children who had been separated. It showed how the system had provided white families and businesses with free labor, while destroying black families and traumatizing an entire generation of children. But it also showed resistance and survival. Photographs of black communities organizing court cases that challenged apprenticeships, newspaper articles from black papers demanding justice, and it showed what became of the children. Those who survived went on to build lives, families, and communities despite the trauma inflicted on them. David Collins stood beside Rebecca as reporters gathered for interviews. "This is my great-great-grandfather," he said, gesturing to the photograph. "Samuel survived what was done to him. He built a family. He made sure we knew our history, even the painful parts. This exhibition is important because it shows that emancipation didn't mean freedom. It shows how systems of oppression adapted, how they found new legal ways to exploit and harm black people, especially children." A reporter asked Rebecca what she hoped people would take from the exhibition. She thought about Samuel's bleeding hand hidden beneath that white glove, about Ruth's unanswered letters, about the thousands of names on the memorial wall. "I hope people understand that historical photographs aren't neutral documents," she said. "They were created by people with specific intentions, often to present a particular image to the world. We have to look closer, question what we're seeing, and search for the truths that people tried to hide. And I hope people recognize that the legacy of slavery didn't end in 1865. It continued through systems like apprenticeship, and understanding that history helps us recognize when similar systems of exploitation exist today." The exhibition would travel to museums across the country. Samuel's story, hidden for 151 years beneath a white glove in a family portrait, would finally be told. The photograph that was meant to showcase the Hartwell family's respectability had instead become evidence of their cruelty and a testament to a child's suffering. Samuel's truth could never be hidden again. The stains on his glove, once concealed, now spoke clearly across the decades. This happened,